konto siła jest.
Bardzo proszę. A jak masz na imię?
Mateusz.
Dobrze, Mateuszku. Otworzymy ci konto. Weźmiemy tylko dokumenty od twojej mamy.
Konta dziecięce, młodzieżowe i studenckie są wyjątkowo atrakcyjną ofertą finansową Polskiej Credit Union. Codzienne transakcje całkowicie zwolnione z opłat za serwis, wyższe oprocentowanie depozytów, bezpłatny dostęp do konta za pomocą karty ATM. Studencka linia kredytowa z oprocentowaniem Prime plus 1%.
Więcej informacji w podziałach
I na stronie internetowej. Credit Union.
Polska Credit Union Świętego Stanisława i Świętego Kazimierza oferuje nowy serwis finansowy. Błyskawiczne przesyłki pieniędzy do Polski i innych krajów świata za pośrednictwem firmy Western Union. Pieniądze wysyłane w oddziale Credit Union można odebrać tego samego dnia, a nawet już w kilka minut po wysłaniu w wybranym punkcie agencyjnym Western Union w Polsce. Wypłata w dolarach lub złotówkach na życzenie klienta. Zapraszamy do Polskiej Credit Union. Informacje w oddziałach lub w call center.
W ubiegłym tygodniu stacja telewizyjna History Channel nadała film dokumentalny pod tytułem Prawdziwa twarz, prezentujący odkrycie naukowe Raya Downinga, wynalazcy trójwymiarowej technologii komputerowej, który odtworzył twarz Chrystusa odciśniętą na całunie turyńskim. Downing twierdzi, że w całunie zakodowana jest informacja dostarczająca dowodów zarówno na to, jak wyglądała twarz Chrystusa, jak i na jego przejście ze śmierci w życie. Badając całun turyński, trafiliśmy na naukowe dowody, że zmartwychwstanie było prawdziwym fizycznym wydarzeniem, które miało miejsce 2000 lat temu. Zbieg okoliczności sprawił, że właśnie dziś, po 10 latach, na prośbę papieża Benedykta XVI przechowywany w katedrze w Turynie całun ponownie został wystawiony do oglądania. Dołączając niejako do wspomnianych wydarzeń, chcielibyśmy przedstawić Państwu obszerne fragmenty filmu pod tytułem Cichy świadek, dokumentującego historię całunu turyńskiego oraz dogłębne badania naukowe dowodzące jego autentyczności. Film, zrealizowany w 1978 roku przez firmę Screen Pro Film, nadamy dziś i w następnym programie za tydzień.
Behind those bars, locked away, is an iron box. Inside the box is a silvered casket. Inside the casket, a piece of cloth 14 feet long. A cloth which bears the mysterious imprint of a crucified man. A cloth said to be the very shroud which wrapped Christ's body in the tomb nearly 2,000 years ago.
Che qui, su questo altare, dal 1694.
Since 1694, the Holy Shroud of Turin has been kept here, high above the altar of the Royal Chapel of Turin Cathedral. It is owned by the ex-King of Italy, Umberto of Savoy, whose ancestors, the Italian Dukes of Savoy, built the shrine especially for it. It is regarded as so holy that it's been shown publicly only 4 times in the last 100 years. It seems incredible even to suppose that the linen cloth in which Jesus was wrapped in the tomb could have survived to this day, and even more incredible that it could bear an image of Christ as he appeared after the crucifixion. But that is the claim we're about to examine. For 4 centuries, the shroud has been kept here, in the North Italian city of Turin. And once every 30 or 40 years, hundreds of thousands of pilgrims have flocked here for those rare occasions when the shroud is publicly displayed, to catch a distant glimpse of the cloth's ghostly image, the image of the front and back of a man laid out in death. Faint image, but with sufficient detail to convince pilgrims they were looking at the very shroud of Christ. Bloodstains, as of nailing through the feet. And hands. A wound in the side. Trickles of blood as from a crown of thorns. And a back covered with the marks of a savage scourging. But probably most convincing of all, the unique and eerie quality of the whole image. Also on the cloth are patches from an accident that befell it long before it came to Turin, when the Dukes of Savoy kept it on the other side of the Alps, in France, at Chambéry. This was then the capital of Savoy, and the shroud was kept here in the Sainte-Chapelle. A Duchess Margaret of Austria had bequeathed upon the shroud a silver casket, and to fit inside, the cloth had to be carefully folded several times. Then, in 1532, although the cloth was badly scarred, the image itself was virtually untouched, and nuns were able to sew in the patches visible to this day. Some 80 years before the fire, the Dukes of Savoy acquired the shroud from a French family called de Charnay, who kept it in Lirey, a tiny village in the heart of France. This man, Geoffrey de Charnay, exhibited the shroud in Lirey in 1389. He inherited it from his father, another Geoffrey de Charnay, a knight killed in battle against the English at Poitiers. And with his death, the chain of certainty about the shroud's origins mysteriously comes to an end. Lirey. Why should the burial shroud of Jesus Christ suddenly appear here? Forgery of religious relics was all too common in the Middle Ages, and at the very time of the de Charnays, a bishop actually made this accusation towards the shroud in a forceful letter to the Pope, an accusation revived at the turn of this century, when the shroud may have been dismissed altogether, were it not for an incident that took place in Turin on May 28, 1898. For the first time, permission had been given to photograph the shroud during one of the rare expositions. And this man, Secondo Pia, was to focus the world's attention on a new and unexpected discovery.
Przerywamy na chwilę projekcję, by przedstawić Państwu propozycje biznesowe polonijnych firm. Na drugą część filmu zapraszam po reklamach.
Dzień dobry.
Dzień dobry.
Przepraszam, czy mogę zadać pytanie?
O, Polish Studio. Dzień dobry pani.
Czy zna pan powiedzenie pieniądze szczęścia nie dają?
Oczywiście, ale nie mogę tego potwierdzić, bo ich nie mam.
Ale idzie pan do banku, po co?
Jak to po co? Po pieniądze.
Przecież panu dobrze bez nich.
Tego nie powiedziałem. A tak naprawdę to nie idę po pieniądze, tylko po pożyczkę na dom.
W takim razie życzę szczęścia.
I pieniędzy.
Zapytaj o najlepsze oprocentowanie hipotek w polskiej Credit Union. Jeśli lecisz do Polski, planujesz wakacje na słonecznym południu lub wycieczkę pielgrzymkę do Ziemi Świętej, Włoch, Meksyku czy innych zakątków świata, zadzwoń do Queen Serena Travel. Tylko u nas super ceny i profesjonalna obsługa. Nasza dewiza to zadowolony klient. Stowarzyszenie Polskich Kombatantów koło nr 20 oferuje do wynajęcia 2 sale w swym domu, położonym w centrum Toronto przy 206 Beverly Street. Elegancko przystrojone sale na 250 i 70 osób idealnie nadają się do urządzania przyjęć weselnych, chrzcin, komunii, styp i innych uroczystości rodzinnych oraz organizowania koncertów i zebrań. SPK zapewnia doskonały catering, profesjonalną obsługę, przyjazną atmosferę, bezpłatny parking oraz przystępne ceny.
Zapraszam Państwa do obejrzenia drugiej części filmu dokumentalnego pod tytułem Cichy świadek, zrealizowanego w 1978 roku przez Davida Rolfe. Ze względu na długość filmu dokument ten nadamy dziś i w następnym programie za tydzień.
Pierre had discovered that somehow the image on the shroud itself was a negative. Light and shade were reversed. Later and better photographs of the whole shroud confirmed the discovery in even greater detail. The whole body could be seen much more clearly in negative. Was it, after all, possible that Christ had, in some incomprehensible way, left behind an image of himself? Certainly it was very difficult to explain how a medieval forger could have concocted a photographic negative some 5 centuries before the first camera. At the very least, the shroud was the oldest and strangest photograph in the world. The sudden availability of detailed photographs meant that medical men could examine closely the apparent wounds of crucifixion and scourging. Dr. Robert Buckling, forensic pathologist at Los Angeles for many years, is probably one of the most experienced investigators in this field.
To a person experienced in the examination of injuries, this is a particularly interesting case. Instead of having an adult human body to examine, we have images of the front of the body and of the back of the body. Both of these show injuries of various types on the body, all of which are shown in such detail and clarity that a forensic examination can be made. The body is that of an adult male, and the image as it appears here measures 5 feet 10 inches in length, and the estimated body weight is 175 pounds. The body appears to be about 30 to 35 years of age. On the body is a variety of injuries, ranging all the way from simple contusions to large areas of puncture where there has been an outflow of blood. The wounds can best be divided into 5 categories. The first group concerns injuries which appear on the back. These range from the top of the shoulders down to the areas of the calf. They consist of double puncture type wounds which appear to go in a direction from lateral toward medial and downward. They have obviously been made by some implement with sharp edges, and the implement was applied to the skin in a flicking fashion in such a way as to pull out bits of skin.
Ve ne faccio vedere un tipo, uno dei tanti di quelli documentati,
I will show you one type, one of the many documented, on which you can see the ends weighted with tachilli, as the Romans called them. These were heavy balls made of metal or bone. As you can see, this whip is divided into 3 parts, which, when applied, naturally multiplies the number of strokes. If we apply this to the photos of the shroud, for example to this one showing the calves, and if we put these small metal balls of identical size over it, you have a graphic documentation of the marks left by one of the strokes of the whip, and one only. On the left calf, they are the same size and from the same direction. Therefore, these 2 strokes were given by the same scourger. You can now see something even more disturbing by studying the shroud. There are trickles of blood caused by the metal balls which were sharpened. They had spikes at the ends. Applied to the life-size photograph, the proportions and measurements are identical. Complete examination of the Holy Shroud gives us 2 scourges, because the directions converge, one from the right and one from the left, and the number of strokes is excessive, more than 120.
Also present on the back image are 2 areas of abrasion located over the shoulder blades. These are caused by a heavy object resting across the back.
Immaginate una trave che al tempo
When talking of the cross of Jesus, imagine a beam that at the time of Pontius Pilate was put across the shoulders and tied on with a rope. Marks of this beam can be seen in the area of the left and upper right shoulder blades. These are contusions and lacerations from the scourging wounds, which spread under the weight of the beam.
The second group of injuries are those which appear on the face and on the head. On the right cheek, over the malar area, is a swelling which has resulted in partial closing of the right eye. There is also an area on the nose where there is a separation and possible fracture of the nasal cartilage. On the tip of the nose is a small abrasion, possibly resulting from a fall where the nose came in contact with a hard object.
His fall was unavoidable and was one of the most common spectacles of those times. The consequences are very clear on the shroud. You can see the left and the right leg. The left leg at the kneecap has very bad laceration and contusion. It is evident that the left leg bent and hit against the stones.
In the forehead and in the scalp is a series of blood stains, one of which has the configuration of a figure 3. These appear not only on the front part of the forehead, but also on the back part of the scalp and high at the vertex of the head. They were made by sharp pointed objects which are projected below the skin and produced bleeding. Their configuration is such that the implement was like a cap which rested on the head.
This wound, corresponding to a crown of thorns, probably more than any other, identifies the man as Jesus Christ. The Gospels state clearly that the soldiers invented this torture for him alone. It was certainly not normal Roman procedure. A forger would have included such wounds, but would have shown them, as all artists did, as a circlet. Instead, the whole head is covered, suggesting a rough clump of thorns. Almost certainly what actually happened.
Jeszcze raz przerywamy projekcję, by przedstawić Państwu propozycje biznesowe polonijnych firm. Na trzecią, ostatnią dziś część filmu zapraszam po reklamach.
Polska Credit Union Świętego Stanisława i Świętego Kazimierza oferuje nowy serwis finansowy. Błyskawiczne przesyłki pieniędzy do Polski i innych krajów świata za pośrednictwem firmy Western Union. Pieniądze wysyłane w oddziale Credit Union można odebrać tego samego dnia, a nawet już w kilka minut po wysłaniu w wybranym punkcie agencyjnym Western Union w Polsce. Wypłata w dolarach lub złotówkach na życzenie klienta. Zapraszamy do polskiej Credit Union. Informacje w oddziałach lub w call center.
Z Piastem polecieć możesz wszędzie. 100% satysfakcji. Ceny? Sprawdź najpierw u nas.
Dzień dobry.
Dzień dobry.
Przepraszam, czy mogę zadać pytanie?
O, Polish Studio. Dzień dobry pani.
Czy zna pan powiedzenie pieniądze szczęścia nie dają?
Oczywiście, ale nie mogę tego potwierdzić, bo ich nie mam.
Ale idzie pan do banku, po co?
Jak to po co? Po pieniądze.
Przecież panu dobrze bez nich.
Tego nie powiedziałem. A tak naprawdę to nie idę po pieniądze, tylko po pożyczkę na dom.
W takim razie życzę szczęścia.
I pieniędzy.
Zapytaj o najlepsze oprocentowanie hipotek w polskiej Credit Union.
A oto ostatnia dziś część obszernych fragmentów filmu dokumentalnego Cichy, świadek. W 1978 roku dla brytyjskiej firmy Screen Pro Film dokument zrealizował David Rolfe, który również współpracował nad scenariuszem. Nadawanie filmu zakończymy w następnym programie za tydzień.
The third group of injuries involve the area of the wrist and the forearms. In the left wrist is what appears to be a blood stain, which has resulted from a puncture-type wound of the left wrist. This stain has two divergent streams which extend downward. If the left arm is moved laterally to a position where these two divergent streams are vertical as a result of gravity, we have the position of the arm at the time of the flow of blood. The blood stains which appear on the forearms are also consistent with two angles of blood flow. An injury to this part of the wrist will invariably damage the median nerve, whose function is to flex the thumb across the palm. It's interesting to note that there are no thumbs in these images. The next group of injuries are those about the feet, and they can best be seen on the dorsal image. The imprint of the right foot is pretty clear, and the heel and the toe are well defined. The left foot is less well defined. The left heel is elevated higher than the right heel, suggesting that the left foot was on top of the right instep and that a single spike was used to impale the 2 feet together.
Crucifixion took many different forms, each carefully designed to provide a slow, lingering death. The wounds on the shroud, particularly the blood flows on the arms, make it possible to accurately reconstruct the form of crucifixion used and illustrate the awful technical realities. Firstly, the nails pierced the wrists, which, contrary to the imagination of artists down the centuries, is the only place that will take the weight of a body. Suspended only by the arms, the victim would die much too quickly, probably within minutes of suffocation. So the feet have been nailed to provide the support necessary to extend the agony. The divergent streams of blood indicate two distinct positions. In the first, the weight is mainly on the wrists, with the body slumped. In the second position, to avoid suffocation, some of the weight is transferred to the feet, raising the chest and altering the angle of the arms. Thus the victim was thrown from one excruciating pain to another, until exhaustion overcame or the legs were broken. It is even possible to calculate the final position on the cross.
The last of the injuries is an apparent wound to the side. Here, in addition to a large outflow of blood from the heart, there is also evidence of another thin, watery type substance, which is best seen on the dorsal image, where blood has flowed across the lower part of the back and is separated from the heavier blood components. The markings on this image are so clear and so medically accurate that the pathological facts which they reflect concerning the suffering and death of the man depicted here are, in my opinion, beyond dispute.
During the last few years, an increasing number of scholars have developed a desire to find out more about the Shroud. But Dr. John Robinson, Dean of Trinity College, Cambridge, was perhaps the last one would expect to take a deep interest. His books, particularly Honest to God, have earned him a reputation of being very much a skeptic.
Well, my interest in the Shroud is primarily as a New Testament scholar, and I must confess that when I first investigated it, I was as skeptical of this relic as of any other, all of which, as far as I know, have been shown to be bogus. But the more one went into it, the more one realized there was so much about this thing that a forger would never really have thought of, and indeed that he would come up, I think, with a very different cloth from the one we now have, because he would have started from the evidence of the New Testament as interpreted by Christian tradition, and he would probably have envisaged the body of Jesus as having been wound round in a winding cloth, rather like an Egyptian mummy, with possibly a face cloth over the front, on which he would then have forged an image rather like the bogus St. Veronica's handkerchief. In fact, what we have fits extraordinarily well with the New Testament evidence, and from my point of view helps to make a great deal more sense of it than I saw before.
In 1973, the weave of the Shroud was microscopically examined by a Turin scientific commission, and although no accurate placing could be obtained, it was found to be quite compatible with material woven on looms in the Middle East at the time of Christ. But the biggest surprise and most positive results came from the studies of a Swiss criminologist and botanist, a special investigator for European police forces, and an expert in the study and identification of pollens.
It is amazing that every flowering plant produces pollen of its own, which can be distinguished from any other pollen. I often employed the study of the microscopical dust in the garments of a suspect, on weapons, tools, or any other piece of evidence in order to find out where these objects had come from. As pollen grains have a very resistant outer wall, the so-called exine, so that they remain unchanged for thousands of years.
Dr. Fry was given an opportunity to study the Shroud at first hand when, in 1973, he was asked to authenticate photographs of the cloth taken a few years earlier.
I remarked between the threads some dust particles, some of them looking like pollen grains or spores. At higher magnification, I was certain of it, and so I asked the competent authorities if it would be possible to take dust samples. I hoped by this examination to find out some details about the history of the Shroud.